There is something profoundly disturbing happening in the bowels of the United States, a silent movement that doesn't appear in traditional headlines nor occupy space in official narratives, but which reveals itself in the details that speeches avoid. Streets where the noise has disappeared, facades that have lost their color, entire cities that seem to breathe only through the memory of a past that no longer holds up. In regions that once pulsed with constant activity, what we see now are long, exhausted roads, populated by stretches of absolute silence, as if the country were imploding from the inside out, slowly, without admitting that something essential has broken along the way. Along internal migration routes, there are increasing reports of families abandoning homes built over generations because the cost of living no longer fits within their budget, revealing a scenario where workers endure endless shifts and still sleep in cars parked in the shade of supermarkets or behind gas stations awaiting a tomorrow that seems increasingly distant. This phenomenon, which many try to treat as an exception, has expanded to a point where it can no longer be considered invisible, as it exposes the fragility of a nation that for decades presented itself as indestructible. The contrast between the global image of power and the daily lives of millions of Americans produces a profound emotional rupture, fueling the pain of those who feel the world has become cold, hostile, and impersonal, and the growing desire to escape the chaos and find somewhere where they can breathe again. Meanwhile, beneath the bright surface of institutional optimism, a disturbing diagnosis takes shape, suggesting that the visible signs are only the first layer of something much larger. What if all of this is just the beginning of a truth that no one has dared to reveal until now? Want to find out? Before we move on to the next revelations, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This strengthens our work and helps this documentary reach those who also need to understand what is really happening behind the image of the United States. Stay with us, because what comes next delves even deeper into this investigation. Traveling through the most affected regions of the country, it becomes impossible to ignore the visible signs of a system that is slowly losing its ability to sustain the narrative of prosperity that has shaped its image for decades. In entire states, neighborhoods once known for their economic vitality now exhibit a kind of social torpor, with empty sidewalks, commercial buildings that seem frozen in time, and avenues that register a human flow well below what was once considered normal. The changes, although gradual, have acquired a constant rhythm, revealing that this is not a passing phenomenon, but a profound erosion that alters the daily lives of millions of people. Long lines at food donation centers contrast with overflowing shelves. In supermarkets where almost no one has purchasing power anymore, creating a scenario that mixes abundance and misery in uncomfortable proportions. Alongside this, small communities face the disappearance of basic services such as schools, hospitals, and police stations, forcing residents to make long journeys to obtain minimal assistance. In many cities, the successive closure of factories and logistics centers not only eliminates jobs, but also triggers a domino effect that empties cafes, workshops, local shops, and the entire structure that depends on the circulation of income. The middle class, which for so long sustained the backbone of the country, finds itself fragmented amidst growing debt, stagnant wages, and a cost of living that is advancing at an unrelenting pace. A peculiar silence settles in these places, not the natural silence of small towns, but a silence laden with absence, as if the inhabitants were waiting for something that never arrives. This silence also manifests itself emotionally. The feeling of constant uncertainty transforms simple conversations into outpourings of insecurity, fear of the future, and the impression that modern life has become a grueling race without a finish line. People who once had plans and expectations now find themselves trapped in daily decisions focused solely on economic survival. And as each symptom fits together like a piece of a larger mosaic, an inevitable question arises. If all this is just the surface, what? Hidden forces are truly driving the country to this state of collective exhaustion. When one observes the silent advance of these symptoms across different regions of the country, it becomes evident that the deterioration cannot be attributed solely to chance or an unfortunate sequence of isolated events. There is a larger, complex and strategically constructed mechanism operating behind the scenes of the economy and politics, shaping the living conditions of millions of citizens without most realizing the mechanisms that sustain this harmful transformation. The crisis, often presented as a result of natural market instabilities, reveals, upon in-depth analysis, clear links to corporate decisions, global financial movements, and legislation that have gradually transferred power from the hands of the active population to institutions that never face the consequences of their own choices. This is not merely a matter of mismanagement or governmental negligence, but a process of wealth centralization that over decades has reshaped the country's structure to the benefit of a tiny, influential segment of the population. This gives rise to so-called convenient truths, narratives carefully disseminated to preserve the illusion that everything is still under control. Among them is the belief that individual effort is always sufficient to guarantee stability, even when the system itself constantly reduces opportunities. Or the idea that the middle class will continue to exist while its pillars are eroded by deliberate decisions to cut public spending, make labor more flexible, and deregulate finance. These discursive constructions reinforce the impression that the blame falls exclusively on the individual, creating a cycle of frustration and guilt that prevents an understanding of the real dimension of the problem. The population, occupied with exhausting routines, hardly finds the time or energy to investigate what lies behind the official versions. Meanwhile, institutions that should protect citizens end up aligned with the interests of conglomerates that move untraceable sums of money, influencing elections, judicial decisions, and even the production of information that reaches people's homes. In this way, lies function as invisible walls that prevent any clear perception of reality. However, when these structures begin to fail, their effects become impossible to hide. And it is precisely at this point, when the veil begins to tear, that the consequences take on an even more disturbing form, a form that for many has become impossible to ignore. Want to understand how this manifests itself in everyday life? As the hidden structures underpinning the crisis begin to reveal themselves, it becomes clear that its effects are no longer limited to economic indicators or cold statistics, but spread to every aspect of daily life, creating an impact that shapes social behavior, emotional stability, and the planning capacity of millions of citizens. In regions where job losses have been most intense, factory closures cause not only an immediate financial collapse, but trigger a slow dissolution of the community fabric, because when a city's main source of income disappears, everything around it suffers. Restaurants, markets, pharmacies, small family shops, and even central institutions such as schools and health centers begin to suffer cuts or complete closures, leading entire populations to live in a state of constant forced adaptation, where the cost of survival exceeds the cost of living with dignity. Internal migration is becoming a common phenomenon, with families who once prided themselves on deep roots being forced to abandon entire regions to try and start over in states considered more affordable. However, upon arrival, they find communities equally pressured by the same relentless logic of rising costs and declining wages. This massive movement, though little publicized, creates an overload effect on public services, amplifying local tensions and fueling silent conflicts between newcomers and long-time residents. As a result, the country begins to carry a kind of nomadic fracture, where millions live in emotional and geographical transit, unable to establish a stable point of return. The crisis also infiltrates daily life through more subtle channels, such as the increase in food insecurity in households across all socioeconomic levels. Families who previously never imagined depending on donations or food banks now face the reality of an increasingly empty refrigerator, while the price of essential items continues to rise at a much faster rate than wages. This constant imbalance creates a permanent feeling of loss of control, intensified by the difficulty of predicting how much the basics will cost the following month. Mental health also suffers significant setbacks. The accumulation of debt, the persistent fear of losing housing, work overload, and continuous exposure to stressful Environments generate high rates of anxiety, depression, and emotional exhaustion. In several regions, hospitals face increasing demand for psychological care, while lacking the infrastructure to handle the volume of cases. The country is beginning to face, simultaneously, an external and an internal collapse, both fueled by a system that prioritizes financial results over human stability. As these consequences intertwine, it becomes clear that the crisis doesn't advance like a sudden storm, but like a tide that rises slowly and inexorably, submerging everything around it without fanfare. And while many still try to interpret this transformation as an isolated moment, something even deeper begins to emerge, a silent void that reveals the true nature of the collapse. After all, what happens when a country remains standing on the outside but empties out on the inside? Want to see where this leads us? While external consequences accumulate like layers of an inevitable collapse, an even deeper transformation silently takes hold within society, revealing that the crisis is not limited to the economic field, but reaches the emotional dimension in such a comprehensive way that it becomes impossible to separate them. In several regions, a growing phenomenon of isolation is observed, not only geographical but human. People remain surrounded by screens, notifications, and devices that promise connection, yet they live daily with the feeling that none of these interactions offers the slightest real presence. The country, which for decades presented itself as a symbol of social dynamism, begins to express a kind of weariness that is evident even in places where the lights remain on. Apartments filled with technology remain in absolute silence, while entire streets exhibit such reduced traffic that they seem suspended in time. This disconnect becomes even more evident in the largest metropolises, where the accelerated pace has always been associated with vitality. Today, however, this same pace shows clear signs of emotional exhaustion, with individuals moving between commitments, carrying expressions marked by weariness, frustration, and a growing sense of discouragement. The promise of unlimited progress, which for years fueled dreams and plans, now becomes a reality where constant effort does not guarantee stability and often does not even offer the necessary psychological relief to continue. Loneliness, once seen as a characteristic of overpopulated cities, now takes on a deeper and quieter form, affecting workers, young people, the elderly, and families who live daily with the impression that the world has become too big to offer belonging. Even in homes where financial stability still exists, a void settles in that cannot be filled by material possessions. The feeling that something essential has been lost hangs over trivial conversations, simple decisions, and daily routines, as if the entire country were facing a kind of emotional emptiness that symbolically precedes economic depletion. Technological progress has not been able to prevent this phenomenon. On the contrary, in many cases, it has accelerated the perception that modernity has distanced itself from human essence. And when emotional emptiness combines with financial instability, it creates fertile ground for even more disturbing consequences. But what really happens when this feeling becomes measurable? Want to understand how the numbers expose what many still try to deny? When emotional emptiness becomes part of daily life, the tendency is to believe it's merely a subjective impression, a psychological reflection of difficult times. However, observing the data accumulating in various national studies and reports reveals that this feeling of exhaustion is not the result of isolated perceptions, but part of a statistical picture that clearly reveals the scale of the problem. In recent years, the number of Americans who regularly rely on food banks has reached levels higher than those recorded during historical periods of crisis, demonstrating that food insecurity is no longer a phenomenon restricted to poor regions and has begun to affect ordinary workers, entire families, and individuals who, even when employed, cannot keep up with the continuous increase in the cost of living. This disparity between income and expenses has become so pronounced that a large part of the population lives permanently on alert, fearing that any unforeseen event could push them into irreversible instability. Debt levels also present an alarming scenario. Credit cards reach maximum limits, loans accumulate interest that becomes unpayable, and millions of people allocate a large part of their salary just to keep debts alive, with no real prospect of paying them off. Student debt, which already exceeds unimaginable figures, traps entire generations in financial commitments that shape career choices, impose sacrifices, and postpone essential decisions such as starting a family or buying a house. These numbers tell a story that is rarely discussed in depth, as they reveal a society that relies on credit to maintain an appearance of stability that, in practice, no longer exists. The housing situation confirms this picture. Rents have increased at such an accelerated rate that in some regions they exceed the average salary, leading workers to resort to improvised solutions, such as living in trailers, cars, or sharing tiny spaces with several people. The rate of people living in near-homeless situations, those who still have a roof over their heads but lack residential security, is silently growing, revealing that the line between having a home and losing it has become too narrow. These numbers, though cold and simple, accurately depict what millions already feel. And when statistics and reality converge, all that remains is to confront the question few dare to ask. What happens when the future ceases to offer minimal guarantees? Want to see what this tension heralds? When one closely observes the convergence between the numbers describing the economic reality and the emotional strain spreading across the country, it becomes inevitable to recognize that the current scenario represents not just a turbulent phase, but a turning point whose consequences will extend for decades. Experts analyzing social and economic trends point out that the combination of increasing debt, stagnant wages, and a continuous rise in the cost of living creates a kind of silent storm, whose force does not manifest abruptly, but accumulates in successive layers until it reaches a breaking point that is difficult to reverse. In several regions, the disappearance of stable jobs and the weakening of public assistance systems demonstrate that the safety nets once considered solid can no longer absorb the impact of such a large number of people living on the brink of financial collapse. This constant pressure not only affects the most vulnerable sectors, but permeates the entire social structure, creating an environment where simple decisions become a source of anxiety. Families begin to rethink basic habits such as commuting, food, and medical care, while young adults question whether it is worthwhile to plan a future in a country where costs systematically exceed the real possibilities of upward mobility. This climate of prolonged uncertainty influences collective behaviors, diminishing trust in institutions, weakening community ties, and fueling a growing sense of generalized instability. With each new economic report, it becomes more evident that the country is slowly moving towards a situation where crises will cease to be isolated events and will become part of everyday life. Furthermore, the deterioration of public infrastructure has effects that go far beyond the immediate. Schools face resource shortages, hospitals operate at permanent capacity, and essential services become more expensive and less accessible. This progressive weakening has a direct impact on quality of life, reducing opportunities for social mobility and widening existing inequalities. Gradually, the perception grows that tomorrow will not only be a more difficult version of the present, but a reality marked by the absence of guarantees. It is at this point, when the future ceases to offer a clear horizon, that one understands the depth of the warning that is silently settling over the country, indicating that the crisis is not just an episode, but a decisive turning point. As the national landscape silently and profoundly reshapes itself, it becomes evident that the crisis being observed is not limited to numbers, statistics, or isolated events, but represents a structural shift, altering how society understands the very meaning of stability. The collective perception that the future no longer offers solid promises acts as a mirror, revealing previously ignored fragilities, showing that the problem lies not only in the economy, but in the gradual loss of confidence that underpins the functioning of any nation. Many people are beginning to face their routines with a mixture of resistance and resignation, aware that the world around them is transforming at a faster pace than the individual capacity to keep up with these changes. Time, which previously seemed divided between present effort and future hope, now focuses exclusively on trying to maintain the essentials. In this context, the feeling of emptiness that pervades different regions becomes more than an emotional reflection. It transforms into a collective metaphor for the urgent need to understand the extent of the ongoing transformations. The appearance of normality that still persists in some cities acts as a kind of polished surface that conceals increasingly deep cracks, and when these cracks become visible, they make it equally evident that the country is facing a turning point that cannot be ignored. The real question is no longer about economic collapse, but about what remains standing when everything that seemed solid crumbles. If this video helped you see this scenario more clearly, please subscribe to the channel. Your participation strengthens this work and allows investigations like this to continue revealing truths that many prefer to keep silent about.